Right. Fasten your seatbelts, everyone, because we're about to take a deep dive into something that might make you think twice the next time you see a bird near an airport.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, bird strikes
Interesting.
and their impact on aviation safety.
Right.
We've got a ton of research and news here, all triggered by a recent incident that really,
Oh,
it brings it all to life, you know?
yeah, I know what you mean. It's funny how we often only hear about the really dramatic cases, like the miracle on the Hudson.
Right, exactly.
But the truth is, bird strikes happen way more than people realize.
Yeah, way more.
What's really fascinating to me is that
Bro.
you have thousands of these strikes happening every year.
Yeah,
But catastrophic incidents, those are actually quite rare.
like just last week, American Airlines Flight 1722,
Uh-huh.
taking off from LaGuardia Airport in New York,
Yeah.
headed for Charlotte, North Carolina.
Right.
Everything seemed normal,
Yeah.
and then, boom,
Whoa.
a flock of birds. They hit the plane, knocked out one of the engines.
Wow.
Luckily, everyone landed safely,
Thank goodness.
but
Yeah.
it definitely got people's attention.
It should.
Yeah, and that pilot's Mayday call
Oh, yeah.
really captures the urgency of the
It
situation.
does, yeah.
Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
Wow.
American 1722 engine failure. It appears we have an engine failure, but we're still kind of working through to figure out what's going on. We hit
Oh.
birds on the way out.
Chills.
Yeah.
Right.
Chilling, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes you realize, even though these big incidents are rare,
Uh-huh.
that potential for disaster.
It's always there.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing this deep dive.
Right.
To really understand how this risk is managed.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Because, you've probably seen birds near airports yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Now imagine a jetliner hitting one at takeoff speed.
Right.
We're talking about
Huge force.
an immense amount of force. Absolutely. In fact, just in 2023 alone, almost 20,000 bird strikes were reported in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Pretty staggering number.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, how do we keep those close calls just that, close calls?
And it's interesting, Flight 1722
Mm-hmm.
took off from the same airport
No.
and was headed to the same destination
Right.
as that much more famous incident.
Oh, right. Yeah, the miracle on the Hudson.
Exactly.
January of 2009.
Yeah.
U.S. Airways Flight 1549
Yeah.
hit a flock of Canada geese.
Oh, wow.
Shortly after takeoff,
Oh, no.
they lost both engines.
Oh, God.
But Captain Sullenberger,
Yeah.
with incredible skill,
Right.
managed to land the plane safely in the Hudson River.
I'm
And all 155 people on board, they survived.
Yeah, thankfully. I mean, that incident,
I know.
it really captured the public's imagination.
It did.
Right.
For good reason. It also, though, showed everyone just how high the stakes are
Yeah,
when it comes to managing these bird strikes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we know these incidents are happening.
Yep.
We know the potential consequences can be serious.
Yeah.
So what's being done about it? I mean, it's not like we can just, eliminate birds.
Right. Oh, of course not. But that's where things get really interesting, I think.
Huh?
There's a whole range of approaches
Yeah.
being used,
Yeah.
from very high-tech solutions
Okay.
to habitat management strategies.
And the FAA, they're actively involved, right?
Absolutely.
In investigating incidents like this recent one
Oh, yeah.
with American Airlines.
They are constantly working
Okay.
to track bird strikes,
Right?
analyze the data,
Mm-hmm.
research bird behavior,
Uh-huh.
and develop strategies to reduce the risk.
Okay, so it's not just about slapping, stronger windshields on planes.
No.
What kind of high-tech solutions are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about things like advanced radar systems
Okay.
that can actually detect birds from miles away, giving pilots time to adjust their course. And these aren't your typical weather radars either. We're talking about systems
Okay.
using Doppler technology
Wow.
to detect bird movement patterns and densities,
Huh.
which can really make a difference in those crucial moments
Yeah.
during takeoff and landing.
Right. Early detection is key, right?
Absolutely.
Give the pilots the information they need
Yeah.
to avoid a collision.
Right.
But wouldn't that be super expensive to implement, across all aircraft?
Cost is definitely a factor, but the technology, it's becoming
Yeah.
more sophisticated and affordable.
Okay.
Some systems even use algorithms to predict bird movements
Ah.
based on things like weather patterns and historical data.
So it's like a bird strike prediction system.
Almost like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Built right into the plane.
Wow. That's impressive. But what about the planes themselves? Can
Mm.
they be designed to, like, better withstand bird strikes?
That's another area where a lot of progress is being made. Researchers are developing bird-resistant aircraft engines.
Huh.
These engines can withstand impacts
Oh, wow.
without catastrophic failure.
Yeah.
And it's not just about using stronger materials either.
So it's the design, too.
It is. They're redesigning certain engine components to
Interesting.
make them less susceptible to damage from bird impacts.
So a combination of tougher materials and clever engineering.
Right.
What are some of the specific design changes they're making?
Well, one approach that I think is really interesting involves
Okay.
incorporating small gaps or grooves into the leading edges of engine fan blades.
Oh, interesting.
And the idea is that these gaps would allow a bird to pass through the engine with less force,
Okay.
reducing the likelihood of serious damage.
So it's almost like giving the bird a slightly easier path
That's the idea.
through the engine
Yeah.
to minimize the impact.
Exactly. And, it highlights the fact that sometimes the most effective solutions are surprisingly simple.
Yeah, that's true.
It's about understanding the physics
Right.
of bird strikes and finding creative ways to reduce their impact.
This is all really fascinating. But it also makes me wonder, are there any drawbacks or challenges to these high-tech solutions? I mean, they sound pretty expensive.
Well, you're right.
Yeah.
Cost is definitely a challenge.
Okay.
Developing and implementing these technologies, it can be very expensive.
Right.
There's also the issue of integration. Fitting these new technologies into existing aircraft.
Yeah.
That can be complex.
Right.
And then there's the ongoing cost of maintenance and training.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not as simple as just inventing, like, a cool new gadget.
Right.
You have to figure out how to make it work in the real world
Yeah.
on a large scale.
On a large scale, that's right. And that's why, finding the right balance between effectiveness, affordability, and practicality is so crucial.
Yeah, for sure. But high-tech solutions are just one part of the picture.
Right.
There's a whole other approach that focuses on
On the birds.
managing the birds themselves.
Yeah,
Okay. So instead of focusing on the planes,
exactly.
we're focusing on the birds.
It involves understanding bird behavior
Okay.
and modifying their habitats to make airports less attractive to them.
Essentially making airports less bird-friendly.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. How do you make an airport less appealing to birds?
It starts with understanding what attracts them in the first place.
Okay. Yeah.
Airports often have large areas of open grassland,
Right.
which can be ideal habitat for certain bird species.
Sure.
And then there are things like standing water,
Uh-huh.
which attracts waterfowl, and insects,
Yeah.
which attract insectivorous birds.
Yeah.
So the key is to eliminate these attractants.
Okay. So it's kind of like giving the airport a landscaping makeover,
In a way, yeah.
but with the goal of making it less hospitable to birds.
Right.
What are some of the specific techniques they use?
Well, habitat modification is a big one. This could involve planting different types of vegetation that are less attractive to birds, or removing standing water sources.
Okay.
Then there are things like noise cannons,
Oh, yeah.
which can be used to scare birds away from sensitive areas.
Noise cannons. Those sound,
They can be intense.
yeah, intense.
But they're generally used sparingly
Okay.
and strategically.
Right.
The idea is to create a temporary disturbance.
Yeah.
Makes birds want to avoid the area.
Okay.
There are also more passive techniques,
Oh.
like using bird distress calls or visual deterrents like scarecrows or reflective tape.
So it's a combination of making the airport less appealing
Right.
and using various techniques
Yeah.
to encourage birds to stay away.
Yeah, but wouldn't that just shift the problem elsewhere?
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's why a multifaceted approach is so important.
Right.
It's not just about pushing birds from one location to another,
Right.
but about understanding their behavior
Yeah.
and finding ways to manage their presence in a way that minimizes risk.
Okay. This is all incredibly insightful. We've talked about high-tech radar systems,
Yeah.
tougher aircraft engines, and now habitat management. Are there any other approaches being considered? What about lasers? I've heard about those being used to deter birds.
Lasers, yeah.
Yep.
That's another area of active research. And it might sound like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
Right.
Yeah. But the science behind it is actually quite sound. Birds are very sensitive to light.
Right.
And certain types of lasers can create a visual disturbance
Huh.
that makes them want to avoid an area.
So it's like creating an invisible fence in the sky using light instead of electricity.
That's a good way to put it.
That's pretty cool.
It is, yeah. And the beauty of this approach is that it's non-lethal
Okay.
and doesn't cause any physical harm to the birds.
That's good to hear. But are these lasers really effective? Can they really keep birds away from, like, such a large area like an airport?
Well, the research is ongoing,
Okay.
but early results are promising.
Hmm.
Studies have shown that certain types of lasers can be very effective at deterring birds from specific areas.
Okay.
Of course, there are challenges,
Yeah, I bet.
particularly with safety. These lasers need to be powerful enough to deter birds, but not so powerful that they pose a risk to pilots or people on the ground.
Yeah. We definitely don't want to be shooting lasers at airplanes.
Right, exactly.
But it sounds like there's a lot of potential there.
There is.
What types of lasers are they using? And how are they making sure they're safe?
Well, they're experimenting with different wavelengths of light,
Okay.
different pulse patterns, and even different colors
Mm-hmm.
to find the most effective and safe ways to deter birds. It's a constantly evolving field. But you know what's really striking about all of this?
What's that?
It's not just about the immediate safety of passengers.
Yeah.
It's about the future of aviation itself.
Right. As air travel continues to grow,
Yeah.
finding effective solutions to bird strikes is going to become even more critical.
It is. So what are some of the key things researchers are focusing on as they look towards the future?
That's a great question.
One of the biggest areas of focus is on developing a more holistic understanding
Okay.
of bird behavior.
Right.
They're using all sorts of tools and technologies,
Yeah.
from radar tracking to artificial intelligence, to better understand how birds move and interact with their environment.
Okay.
And that knowledge is crucial for developing more effective mitigation strategies.
Makes sense that the more we understand about birds,
Right.
the better equipped we'll be to prevent these unwanted encounters.
Exactly. And they're also exploring new technologies and materials that could make aircraft even more resistant to bird strikes. For example, there's a lot of research being done on self-healing materials that could automatically repair minor damage caused by bird impacts.
Wow. Self-healing materials. That sounds like something straight out of a superhero movie.
It does, doesn't it?
It does.
But it's a real area of research.
Wow.
And it has the potential to revolutionize aircraft design.
It's amazing to think about the possibilities.
Yeah.
But with all this cutting-edge technology being developed, I'm curious, are there any ethical considerations that need to be taken into account?
That's an important question. And while this specific episode isn't focused on the ethical considerations surrounding bird strikes, it's definitely a conversation worth having.
Okay.
Perhaps in a future deep dive,
Right.
we can explore those aspects further.
Sure.
But for now, I think it's fascinating to see how technology and innovation are being used to address this challenge.
I agree. And it's a good reminder that we need to be mindful of the potential impact of these technologies on birds and their habitat.
Of course, yeah.
It's all about finding that balance between protecting aircraft and respecting the natural world. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a moment to circle back to the heart of the issue. What are some of the most common misconceptions people have about bird strikes?
Well, one common misconception is that bird strikes only happen at low altitudes
Okay.
during takeoff or landing.
Yeah.
But the reality is birds can fly at surprisingly high altitudes.
Oh, wow.
And strikes have been reported at altitudes of over 30,000 feet.
That's high.
So it's important to be aware of the risk throughout the entire flight.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people assume that once you're up in the air, you're pretty much safe from birds.
That's right. Another misconception is that bird strikes are always catastrophic.
Oh, okay.
While they can certainly cause significant damage,
Right.
the vast majority of bird strikes result in minor damage or no damage at all.
Hmm.
And thanks to the ongoing efforts of researchers, engineers, and wildlife biologists,
Yeah.
the number of serious incidents is steadily declining.
That's reassuring to hear. But it's important to remember that even a small bird can cause problems if it hits the wrong part of the plane at the wrong time. Right.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have multiple layers of protection in place,
Right.
from advanced radar systems
Yeah.
to bird-resistant engines to habitat management strategies. It's a multifaceted approach
Right.
that's constantly evolving as we learn more about birds and how to mitigate the risks they pose to aviation.
Yeah. It's clear that there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes
There is.
to keep us safe from bird strikes. And it's a testament to the dedication and ingenuity of the people working in this field.
I agree.
But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to bring it back to our listeners. What are some things they can do to learn more about bird strikes and the efforts being made to prevent them?
That's a great question. There are a lot of great resources available online,
Oh, cool.
including websites and publications from organizations like the FAA.
Okay. And the Bird Strike Committee USA. These organizations provide valuable information
Yeah.
about bird strike statistics,
Okay.
prevention strategies, and research initiatives.
So if you're interested in learning more, those are good places to start.
Yeah, they are.
And, it's interesting to think about how much we've learned about bird strikes.
Right.
Just from this one incident with American Airlines Flight 1722,
Yeah.
it's amazing how one event can open up such a deep dive
It is.
into a complex topic.
What's fascinating to me is that this isn't just about the immediate safety of passengers.
Right.
It's about the future of aviation itself.
It is.
As air travel continues to grow, finding effective solutions to bird strikes, it's going to become even more critical.
It is, yeah.
And with so many different perspectives and solutions on the table,
Yeah.
it's clear that this is a problem that demands continued research,
Right.
collaboration, and innovation.
Yeah.
But for now, we're going to take a quick pause.
When we come back, we'll delve deeper into some of the most promising technologies
Okay.
being developed to keep birds and planes
Yeah.
from having those unwelcome encounters.
Okay, yeah. Stay tuned.
All right.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about all these different approaches to dealing with bird strikes, and it seems like technology is playing a huge role. I'm especially intrigued by those advanced radar systems you mentioned.
Yeah, they're really fascinating. It's like giving pilots a superpower to see those flocks of birds miles away long before they pose any threat to the aircraft.
So it's not just a blip on the screen saying, like, bird. It's giving pilots more detailed information about the potential threat.
Exactly. And the technology is constantly evolving. Some systems are even incorporating artificial intelligence to analyze that radar data and predict bird movements based on things like weather patterns, time of day, and historical data.
Yeah.
It's like having a bird strike prediction system built right into the plane.
That's incredible. But I imagine these systems must be pretty expensive to develop and install. Is this technology only available for larger commercial aircraft, or can smaller planes benefit from it too?
Well, cost is definitely a factor, but as with any new technology, it starts out being used in those high-end applications like commercial airliners and military aircraft. But as it matures, it tends to trickle down to smaller aircraft as well.
That makes sense. I'm curious, are there any limitations to these radar systems? I mean, birds are pretty small and they can be unpredictable.
You're right. There are definitely challenges. Birds can be small and fast-moving, and weather conditions can sometimes interfere with radar detection. But researchers are working on overcoming these limitations by developing even more sensitive radar systems and by integrating them with other technologies like optical sensors and infrared cameras to provide a more complete picture of the airspace.
So it's not just radar on its own. It's about combining different technologies to get the best possible detection.
Precisely. It's all about layering different systems and approaches to create a more robust and reliable safety net. And speaking of layers of protection, let's talk about the planes themselves. We touched on this earlier, but I'd love to delve deeper into those bird-resistant aircraft engines you mentioned. How exactly do you design an engine to withstand a bird strike?
Right, because when I think about a bird hitting a plane engine, I picture those images you see in the news. Dented engine blades, broken fan cases. It's scary stuff.
It certainly can be, but thankfully, modern jet engines are already incredibly robust, and they're designed with multiple safety features to contain damage and prevent catastrophic failure. But researchers are always looking for ways to make them even tougher.
So are we talking about making engines out of some kind of super strong, indestructible metal?
Well, that's one approach. There's a lot of research being done on using stronger and lighter materials like titanium alloys and carbon composites, which can better withstand impacts. But it's not just about the materials themselves, it's also about how they're used and how the engine is designed.
So it's a combination of new materials and clever engineering.
Exactly. Engineers are experimenting with different ways to arrange and reinforce engine components to make them more resistant to bird strikes. For example, they're looking at ways to strengthen the fan blades, which are typically the first point of impact, and to redesign the engine casings to better absorb and distribute the force of an impact.
Okay, so they're basically trying to make the engines more robust and able to absorb those impacts. What are some of the other specific design changes they're making?
Well, one interesting approach is to incorporate features that allow a bird to pass through the engine with less resistance, rather than causing a direct impact. Remember those small gaps or grooves in the leading edges of fan blades we talked about earlier?
Right, almost like giving the bird a slightly easier path through the engine to minimize the damage.
Precisely, that's one example. They're also looking at ways to improve the airflow through the engine, which can help to reduce the force of a bird strike and prevent debris from entering critical areas of the engine.
So it's like using aerodynamics to their advantage, even when it comes to bird strikes.
Absolutely. Every little detail, from the shape of the fan blades to the materials used in the engine casing, can play a role in making an engine more bird resistant. But of course, all of these design improvements come with challenges.
What are some of the biggest challenges they face when trying to build these tougher engines?
Weight is a major factor. Stronger materials can sometimes be heavier, which can impact the overall performance and fuel efficiency of the aircraft. Then there's the issue of cost. Developing and implementing these new technologies and materials can be very expensive, which can drive up the cost of manufacturing and maintaining aircraft. And as we discussed earlier, there are always trade-offs to consider. It's not just about building the strongest possible engine, it's about finding the right balance between strength, weight, cost, and performance.
It sounds like it's a real balancing act. You have to weigh all these different factors to find the optimal solution. But I'm curious, with all these amazing technological advances being developed, are there any downsides or unintended consequences that we need to be aware of?
That's a great question. And it's important to remember that technology is just one tool in the toolbox when it comes to addressing bird strikes. It's not a silver bullet, and it's important to use it responsibly and thoughtfully. For example, some people have raised concerns about the potential impact of lasers on birds and other wildlife. While lasers can be effective at deterring birds, there's still a lot we don't know about their long-term effects, and it's important to make sure they're used in a way that minimizes any potential harm to the environment.
That's an important point. We need to make sure that our efforts to protect aircraft don't end up having unintended negative consequences for the natural world. It's all about finding that balance. So we've talked about radar systems and engines, but what about those lasers? Can you tell me more about how they're being used to deter birds?
Absolutely. The use of lasers to deter birds from airports is a relatively new approach, but it's showing a lot of promise. As we discussed earlier, birds are very sensitive to light, and certain types of lasers can create a visual disturbance that makes them want to avoid an area.
So it's like creating an invisible fence in the sky, but using light instead of electricity. How exactly does it work? What kind of lasers are they using?
They're using specialized lasers that emit green light, which birds are particularly sensitive to. These lasers don't harm the birds, they simply create a visual distraction or annoyance that makes them want to fly away from the area. The lasers are typically mounted on towers or vehicles around the airport perimeter, and they can be operated manually or programmed to scan specific areas where birds are known to congregate.
So it's like having a high-tech scarecrow, using light to keep birds at bay. But how effective are these lasers in real-world settings? I mean, airports are pretty large and open spaces.
That's a good point. The effectiveness of lasers can vary depending on factors like the time of day, weather conditions, and the species of bird being targeted. Some birds are more sensitive to laser light than others, and some birds may become habituated to the laser over time. But overall, studies have shown that lasers can be quite effective at reducing bird activity around airports, especially when used in combination with other methods like habitat modification and noise deterrence.
So it's another tool in the toolbox, and it's most effective when used as part of a multi-layered approach.
Precisely. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to bird strikes. It's about understanding the specific challenges at each airport and then using a combination of methods to reduce the risk as much as possible. And speaking of airports, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the role that airports themselves play in preventing bird strikes.
Okay, so now we're focusing on the environment around the airport. What are some of the things that airports can do to make themselves less attractive to birds?
Well, one of the most effective strategies is habitat modification. This involves making changes to the landscape around the airport to discourage birds from hanging out there.
So it's kind of like giving the airport a bird-unfriendly makeover. What kind of changes are we talking about?
It could involve things like removing standing water, which attracts waterfowl, keeping grass mowed short, which makes it less appealing to birds that like to forage on the ground, and planting trees and shrubs that are less attractive to birds. Essentially, you're trying to make the airport as inhospitable to birds as possible while still maintaining a safe and functional environment.
It makes sense. If you eliminate the things that attract birds in the first place, you're less likely to have them hanging around the airport. But what about birds that are just passing through? Is there any way to deter them from even entering the airspace around the airport?
That's where things like noise deterrence come into play. You might have heard those loud booming sounds around airports. Those are often propane cannons or pyrotechnics being used to scare birds away. They're not meant to harm the birds. They just create a loud noise that startles them and makes them want to fly elsewhere.
So it's like giving them a little auditory nudge to steer clear of the airport. But don't those noises bother the people who live and work near the airport?
That's a valid concern, and airports try to use noise deterrence sparingly and strategically to minimize any disturbance to the surrounding community. They often use them during peak bird activity periods or when there's a heightened risk of bird strikes, such as during takeoff and landing. And there are also more targeted noise deterrents, like sonic devices that emit specific frequencies that are unpleasant to birds but less noticeable to humans.
It's interesting how much thought goes into these strategies. It's not just about randomly making loud noises. It's about understanding bird behavior and using sound in a targeted and effective way. What about those visual deterrents we talked about earlier, like scarecrows and reflective tape? Do those actually work?
Well, their effectiveness can be a bit hit or miss. Some birds may be startled by scarecrows or reflective tape initially, but they often become habituated to them over time and learn to ignore them. They're more effective when used in combination with other methods and when their appearance is changed frequently to prevent birds from becoming accustomed to them.
So it's like keeping the birds on their toes, so to speak, by constantly changing things up.
Exactly. And it's not just about what's happening on the ground. There are also things that pilots can do in the air to avoid bird strikes.
Right. Because even with all these preventative measures in place, there's always a chance of encountering birds in flight. What are some of the things that pilots do to minimize that risk?
Well, pilots are trained to be constantly vigilant and to scan the skies for birds, especially during takeoff and landing. They also communicate with air traffic control to get updates on bird activity in the area, and they use their radar systems to detect potential bird hazards.
So it's a combination of situational awareness, communication, and technology.
Absolutely. And if a pilot does spot a flock of birds, they have several options at their disposal. They can adjust their altitude or flight path to avoid the birds. They can increase their airspeed to reduce the impact of a potential strike, or they can delay takeoff or landing until the birds have cleared the area.
So it's about having a plan and being prepared to react quickly if necessary.
Exactly. Bird strikes are a serious concern in aviation, but thanks to the ongoing efforts of researchers, engineers, pilots, and airport personnel, we've made significant progress in mitigating the risk. But it's a constant battle, and we can't afford to become complacent.
That's a good point. It's a reminder that even with all the technology and strategies we have in place, there's always room for improvement.
And one of the most important things we can do to improve bird strike prevention is to continue to learn more about birds and their behavior. The more we understand about birds, the better equipped we'll be to prevent those unwanted encounters.
That makes a lot of sense. So what are some of the key things that researchers are focusing on as they try to deepen our understanding of bird behavior?
Well, one of the biggest areas of research is on bird migration patterns. Scientists are using tracking devices and satellite imagery to map out the routes that birds take as they travel across the globe. And they're studying the factors that influence those movements, such as weather patterns, food availability, and habitat changes. This information can help us to predict where and when birds are likely to be present in certain areas, which can inform air traffic management decisions and help pilots to avoid high-risk areas.
So it's almost like creating a bird traffic map to guide aircraft safely around those bird highways.
That's a great analogy. Another area of research is on bird behavior around airports. Scientists are studying how birds react to different types of aircraft, noise levels, and lighting conditions, and they're trying to identify the factors that make airports more or less attractive to birds. This information can help us to design more effective habitat modification strategies and develop better bird deterrence.
It's fascinating how much we're still learning about birds and how that knowledge is being applied to improve aviation safety. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to take a moment to connect this back to our listeners. We've been talking a lot about the high-tech solutions being developed to prevent bird strikes. But are there any things that we as passengers can do to help with this issue?
That's a great question. And while we might not be able to directly control bird populations or implement high-tech solutions, we can certainly play a role in raising awareness about this issue.
So it's about spreading the word and making sure people understand the importance of bird strike prevention.
Exactly. We can share what we've learned today with our friends and family, and we can support organizations that are working to mitigate bird strikes and protect bird populations.
That's a great point. Even small actions can make a difference. And who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be inspired to pursue a career in aviation safety or bird conservation.
I wouldn't be surprised. This is a field that's ripe with opportunities for innovation and positive impact.
Well said. Well, I think it's time for us to take a quick pause. When we come back, we'll share some final thoughts and leave you with some things to ponder as you continue your journey through the world of aviation. Stay tuned. And we're back for the final leg of our deep dive into bird strikes and aviation safety.
Yeah, it's amazing how much we've unpacked.
I know, right? Starting from that incident with American Airlines Flight 1722.
Right.
And then diving into all this amazing technology and strategies
It's pretty incredible.
to prevent these incidents from happening.
It is.
And it really seems like it takes a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
And ingenuity to keep those birds and planes from, well,
I'm colliding.
meeting in the wrong place at the wrong time. Exactly.
Definitely.
What really struck me is that multi-layered approach.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's not just one solution.
No, not at all. It's a combination of things.
It's the technology.
Right.
It's the habitat management.
Absolutely.
It's the pilot training.
That's right. It's that constant vigilance
Yeah.
that really makes a difference, understanding bird behavior and then using these innovative tools.
It's pretty amazing. But even beyond the specific solutions, what I found really fascinating is how much we're still learning about birds.
Oh, absolutely.
It seems like the more we understand about their behavior
Right.
and those migration patterns,
Mm-hmm.
the better we can manage the risks.
You're absolutely right. It's that deeper understanding of birds that really informs everything. Their movements, how they react to different environments.
Yeah.
It impacts everything from airport design to flight paths.
And you know what? For our listeners out there, even if they're not pilots or engineers,
Right.
I think this deep dive highlights something really important.
What's that?
We often think about technology
Yeah.
as being separate from nature.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
But here, they're totally intertwined.
They are.
We're using technology to adapt to and coexist with the natural world.
That's a great point. It's not about conquering nature, is it? It's about working within its constraints. And, as we've been talking about, sometimes those most effective solutions are surprisingly simple.
Right.
Like just changing the landscaping around an airport
Yeah.
or making small design tweaks to engine fan blades.
So it's not always about the most complex, futuristic solution.
Right. It's about understanding the problem
Right.
and finding a practical way to address it.
That makes sense.
And it reminds us that we're all part of this ecosystem. Even something as simple as, choosing to fly during non-peak bird migration times.
Right.
That can contribute to safer skies.
That's a great point. We've talked about all these amazing things being done by researchers, aviation professionals. But are there things that everyday people can do to learn more or even get involved in this issue?
Absolutely. There are some fantastic organizations doing incredible work in this field.
Oh, cool.
The Bird Strike Committee USA,
Yeah, I've heard of them.
they're a great resource for information.
Okay.
And they even have volunteer opportunities
Oh, wow.
if you're interested in getting more hands-on.
So if you're fascinated by what we've discussed today, you can actually contribute to the solution.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that even small actions can have a ripple effect.
I like that.
For me, the biggest takeaway from this deep dive,
Yeah,
bird strikes, they are a serious concern, but they are also a solvable problem.
I agree.
It's a challenge that requires ongoing research, collaboration, and innovation.
For sure.
But we're making progress every day.
And it's not just about protecting aircraft.
Right.
It's about finding ways for birds and planes to share the skies safely.
Absolutely.
It's about respecting the natural world while still pushing the boundaries of human ingenuity.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And, next time you're at an airport, I encourage you to take a moment to look out for birds.
Yeah.
Watch their flight patterns.
Yeah.
Observe their behavior. Think about that dance between nature and technology that keeps us all aloft.
That's a great point. It's a reminder that even as we reach for the skies, we're still interconnected with the natural world.
We are.
And understanding that connection
Yeah.
is essential to ensuring the safety